Hi, I'm Dr. Amy Robbins, and welcome to Life, Death, and the Space Between podcast. I'm a licensed clinical psychologist and medium, and here we explore life, death, consciousness, and what it all means. Today's show was originally going to be a ghost story in which I kind of worked through the story and added my own narration in. But in the interview with Mike, today's guest, I was so moved by what he shared and by his experience and by his mystical experience and how he took his spiritual experience and really integrated it into his life and made real profound changes that I didn't want to cut it up, and I wanted you, the listener, to be able to hear his story in his voice in its entirety. So here's Mike's story.
My name is Mike Ergo, and I am a United States Marine Corps veteran, and I served 2001 to 2005 and deployed to Iraq twice. And as an infantry Marine, my job consisted of patrolling, kicking down doors, finding the guys we were trying to get and getting them. And that was the majority of my job, and there was a lot of downtime too. So I had a very interesting experience, my second deployment in Iraq, and both times I was deployed just for 7 months. And my experience, which I think we were talking about it before, still trying to categorize or understand what we'd even call it, it took place during November of 2004, and I was involved in what was called Operation Phantom Fury, and it was this large-scale combat operation in the city of Fallujah in Iraq. And it was a lot of people waiting for us to come into the city, and they were ready to fight to death. And so it was fighting house to house for over a month.
You mean people, civilians, or?
These were both the Iraqi insurgents, the local resistance, and people who were coming in from all over the world if they wanted to fight the Americans. There's a lot of jihadists who knew that if they came there, they could fight the infidels and the Americans. So we were encountering people from Chechnya, Saudi Arabia, Jordan, Syria, everywhere. All across the Middle East. So in late November, a lot of the days blurred together.
Sure.
But it was, I believe, around November 18th. And I had one of my junior Marines in my team. I was in charge of 3 other Marines. And he noticed that some insurgents were hiding, and he saw their weapons sticking out of a pile of clothes and trash that they were hiding under. And we ended up chasing them over some walls and through some houses. And they were going to be set up to ambush the rest of my platoon of 40 so Marines. And so we wanted to get to them before they could set up and hurt these guys. So in the 4th house that we cleared, there's 4 guys clearing 2- and 3-story houses, basically looking for people who are waiting to shoot us. And the very smallest room, the bathroom of this house, we come down the stairs, and my back is against the concrete where the stairs were. 2 of my men were behind me, and my point man was right next to me. We're shoulder to shoulder. He kicks open this door, and these guys are in this room. And immediately we start shooting, they start shooting. And this was only from a few feet away. So this is point blank range. And the door gets slammed shut on their side. And so now we're just both shooting through a door, hoping we're hitting something. And I remember that I started feeling heat on my neck because the bullets must have been that close. And I heard someone behind me yell and fall down the stairs, and I assumed they had been, shot and killed. And I had this moment where I accepted the fact that I was going to die. I was very certain. I was like, well, this is it. And I remember in that moment, wondering, would I call out to God, or would I ask for forgiveness? As someone who grew up as an evangelical Christian, I no longer believed that. And I wondered, would I hedge my bets and just go back on and try to beg for some kind of mercy from a God I didn't believe in anymore in that form. And I didn't do that. And I realized that I was fine being right there with my guys. And I really cared about these guys I was with. And I said, if this is how I go out, this is how I go out.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember I had this moment of just kind of surrender. I was still shooting. I was still there trying to live, but I wasn't so attached to remaining alive. I said, whatever happens, happens. And then something that it took me over 10 years to really acknowledge, something really weird happened. And I started to notice every single cell in my body. And not just prior to that, I had lived in my head. It was almost as if my eyes and my head were, the control center for my whole body, and the rest of my body was just a machine that followed orders. Now I was able to notice every single cell as if it were breathing in and out. And I noticed the hairs growing out of my feet. I noticed it felt like I could see. I had eyeballs all over my body, and I could see in all different directions.
It almost sounds like a psychedelic trip.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what it sounds like. And I've ingested cannabis before, edibly, and I've done psilocybin mushrooms once, but nothing like this.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting you say that too, because I've heard, and I can't find any research on this, but I've heard that sometimes when people are about to die, the body releases some form of DMT, and that does sound. Once I heard that, I was like, that sounds plausible. So it's really interesting, and I entered this kind of timeless space. Everything was so incredibly slow, and then there was just no time. And so I remember just having one moment of one pang of regret that I wouldn't see my girlfriend, who's now my wife. I was like, I would never see her again. And then just totally surrendering to whatever happened. And the next thing that occurred was that my consciousness, or who I was, started to expand. And so it expanded from where my body was to include the bodies of the Marines with me, to include the bodies of these insurgents we were trying to kill, to the concrete in this house and all the materials around it and the dirt, and then went outward into the sky. And so it just I didn't have any sense of self anymore, because those lines were no longer there, those boundaries. I recognized this presence of this greater self that I was part of, and it was timeless, and it was so peaceful. And there was just this deep knowing that everything was going to be all right, that I had nothing to worry about with death. And that lasted, well, it was eternal. It was eternal. But then this weird paradox of how we have time and space back here as we experience it, eventually I came back in, kind of just was warped back into my body, and ended up found myself still shooting at these people. I was still alive, which was a big shock to me.
And you did not get shot, right?
I did not get shot.
This was not a near-death experience. No.
The only thing that happened was a superficial wound where part of a grenade got lodged in my neck. And it was micrometers big. It was something that just fell out a couple weeks later. It was bleeding, but nothing that was even close to, being close to death at all. And that experience, needless to say, did not fit into any kind of paradigm of how the world worked or how I saw reality at all. And so I didn't know what to do with it. Plus, it was sandwiched in between, some pretty gory scenes of killing. And most of the time when that thought came up, I would just numb myself out with alcohol or cannabis or opiates, because I didn't want to. It was too much for me to handle. I wasn't ready for it yet. But I finally was able to see that after I backed off and totally went cold turkey on all substances, except for coffee. It's still my favorite. Then all of a sudden, like, these blips would occur in my mind, be like, oh yeah, that really did happen. Because it's such an insane, such a crazy thing to even describe. I mean, it took me a while to even like find words to describe what was happening, because it was just so much. There was so much information coming in that this one tiny human brain couldn't really process it, especially mine.
Well, and that's the hallmark, from what I've learned, of a mystical spiritual experience, is the ineffability of it, the difficulty describing what happened. But you came back and you didn't talk about it.
No, because I was amongst some of the most alpha, hyper-masculine guys you can imagine. And this didn't fit into our things we talked about. We talked about, who the hottest girls, in movies were, what the best kind of beer was, what we were going to do when we got back home. Some people talked about their faith, but it was usually, either some of the traditional spiritual views, Christianity, Judaism, Buddhism. But that was usually not even talked about that much even. And
in your unit, there were other, in this fight, I don't know all the lingo, so I apologize.
Yeah.
There were people who died, right? In that house that you were
in that little skirmish, the only people who died were the people that I killed in that room. And the guy behind me who was hit, he was luckily, a round struck him through the helmet and took off a chunk of his helmet and ricocheted off. But he fell down thinking he was shot in the head, because it just didn't penetrate his skull. So miraculously survived. We're talking about, he was only a foot behind me. So the fact, we looked in that room too, in that hallway, and it was so improbable that we did not get shot, because my point man and I were pushing against each other's shoulders in this room, trying to go the opposite way. There's just nowhere to go. Mm-hmm. And the fact that we were alive was just, a head scratcher. So I had no wounds at all. And neither did the guys that were with me.
Physical wounds.
No physical wounds.
So, of course, doing what you and I do, I'm going to have to ask you some of these questions, just because I think it's important for people to hear. What happened when you got back, and how do you think this experience transformed you?
Well, after I finally stopped wrestling with my actual experience and stopped trying to fit it into my preconceived ideas of how the world and the universe worked. After I said, just, okay, this is what it is. Let's start with my experience is reality and what's happening. I started to realize that there was nothing to worry about on the other side, and that instead of trying to live as if I had to do everything before I died, I could change my approach to comforting people and just offering love and compassion. And even if it wasn't telling them about this mystical experience I had, I could communicate that message of love that I felt. I felt that love and connection is the most profound thing I've ever felt. The only thing that comes close to it is when my daughter was born. Mm-hmm. And that was just a big explosion of love when I saw her for the first time. But that I feel is my mission right now. And so I do that in a couple different ways. One is as a licensed clinical social worker. I work for the VA, and as part of the vet centers, I provide counseling for any veteran who's been in a combat theater or who's experienced sexual trauma, just to offer that down below all of this numbness and anger and fear and sadness is this unending well of joy. And it is so powerful if people have the courage to go through it. And that's what I did. And that was a big part of my, getting sober and starting the spiritual journey, was facing my fears head on. And I was living a life in a way, it all came together in the summer of 2012. And I was unfaithful to my wife, and I was using a lot and drinking a lot, missing work. And I remember a day looking in the mirror, and I had this tattoo, and it's the Marine Corps motto, Semper Fidelis, always faithful. And just the incongruity of those words and my lifestyle and everything I cared about were at odds. Just the dissonance there. I was like, something has to change, or I'm just going to put a bullet in my head, because I can't live like this.
And a lot of people do.
Yeah. 20 to 22 a day for veterans. And so I said, you know what, before I check out, I'm going to try this. I'm going to try to give it 100%. And I was part of a really intense therapy group where we faced our fears head on. We felt everything we needed to feel. We connected to that spark of pure love and consciousness that many of us have as a child, and maybe we lose along the way somewhere. And we started to allow ourselves to talk to people in really authentic ways and express who we are, confront our fears of who I am is not good enough. And if I show people who I am, they'll want to leave. And so we took those on, a lot of different exercises. And so I told my wife, hey, this is what's going on. I understand you. If you want to leave, I love you, but I know my actions are saying otherwise. And, so it was a rough, 6 months to a year. And she decided she wanted to stay with me if I promised never to use again. And I had some, I started to notice that, okay, now I have to feel all these feelings, and what do I do with this grief? Because once the substances were gone and the chemicals, I didn't have anything else to feel good. And
right. Or to not feel, right?
To not feel.
One of the others, to feel good or not feel.
Yeah. At least when I was in combat, I could be charged full of adrenaline. And at least I felt, the love for the guys around me, the camaraderie, or, the intense hatred for an enemy. There were feelings there and a purpose. And now I was just kind of drifting. So fortunately I had a friend who gave me a birthday present, and he gave me a registration for a half marathon. And this is a really significant part of my life, because I had tried working out and felt okay, but I was feeling really raw those first 6 months of sobriety. But then as I was training up for this, and I was kind of pissed at him, because I didn't want to run or do anything that extreme in my mind. But I had this one day where I was rounding a corner, and all of a sudden I just felt safe in my own body. I felt good. And that was the first time in a long time that I felt like that, because I was diagnosed with PTSD and just had, I was having panic attacks. I was angry. All these memories were coming back fragmented, not even a full cohesive memory, chronological memory. It was just bits and pieces. And this was the first time I can remember since then. It was 7 years after where I felt I didn't need to be anywhere else. And I felt at peace with myself and the universe. And that began a journey of me trying out other endurance sports. Open water swimming was a really big one for me. And just being able to be here in the present moment, which I wasn't able to do, because my mind, the part of my spirit was still back in that room, in that house in Iraq. And I wasn't able to move on from that. And
And it's really uncomfortable to be in the present moment when the present moment is overwhelming you with these feelings of sadness and anger and fear and resentment and, just complete devastation, like for what you experienced, for what you did on some level, right? Like,
and even to describe it, I didn't have that. I didn't have these words I have now. This comes after years of learning about trauma, learning about grief and what happens in war.
Right. Your own therapy, being a therapist.
Oh yeah, exactly. Yeah. So much stuff. Because before, if you had asked me what was going on, I could tell you, I don't like what's going on. It doesn't feel good. And I'm having all these loops of memories, bits and pieces show up, and I don't like it. That would be even lucky if I could say that much. So it was like a fire hose of memories and sensation and feeling. So I started realizing, I watched this one video of this woman who lost her husband in Afghanistan, and she started running to deal with the grief. And I realized that I was doing that too, but now I didn't have to. Like when I remembered my friends who I cared about, I realized once I was able to connect with this experience that we are eternal beings, and that bond, those bonds don't break. I don't have to get over somebody I really care about. I don't have to move on and just cut that part out of my life because it's part of me forever. And that's, I like that. So I can incorporate all those feelings, whatever is there, and keep that love and those bonds through doing something that's healthy for me. I don't have to be at the bar slamming down shots. So I realized that I wanted to incorporate both this new sport that I love, triathlon, and grieving and dealing with trauma together, so I could honor these guys I lost and let their families know that they're not forgotten, and that they're never truly gone. That nobody ever is truly gone, and that we remember them. And I carry them in my hearts and in my being. And the extent that I tell people what that means depends on maybe how ready they are to hear it or what they believe. You know, I'm very careful not to jump in and accost people with the ideas and experiences I have, because I wouldn't have been ready for it, you know.
Right. You got to give them like a little crumb.
Yeah.
Or you feed them the whole sandwich, right?
There was one thing, a couple experiences I've had, even prior, while I was still, you know, heavily intoxicated for the majority of my days. I had a friend, Josh, and he's from Northern California, a couple hours north of where I live. And we weren't best friends, but we were close in a sense that we both knew where we lived. And we were both on the East Coast, stationed on the East Coast, but we're both from Northern California, and you know, both in the same unit. So we were friendly. I really liked the guy. He went back after we got out as a security contractor, and the most horrific thing you can imagine was kidnapped and held, imprisoned for ransom, and, you know, dismembered and beaten to death after a year and a half of being imprisoned. And an awful experience, just devastating, absolutely devastating. I mean, for, you know, us, his brothers in arms, and then especially for his family. So after the funeral and after visiting them, I went up again just to visit, you know, his mom and dad. And I had this dream beforehand. And when I say dream, it happened while I was asleep, but this was much more than a dream. And what I remember for that, and I knew I had to tell him about it. So the dream was, it's myself, my friend Josh, and Josh's dad are sitting talking, and maybe we're having lunch, but it's just on this big bluff overlooking a body of water, and the hill that leads down to the water is exposed dirt and rock at different shades of red and brown. And at one point, as we're just having small talk, just nothing remarkable about it, I asked him, "Hey, how are you doing?" And he looked at me with this really just I know the secret. I have this deep knowledge kind of smile, a really deep smile. And he said, I'm really good. And I said, yeah? He's like, yeah, I'm really good. And there was something about the quality that I about this dream that was it stuck with me. It was...
So it was a visit, right? And
it was a
visitation. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I started, playing the mind games. Well, why would he do it with me? I wasn't his best friend, or like trying to...
Because you were open and you were...
Yeah.
Right? You opened that portal on some consciousness portal.
I realized I was doing the same thing with this other experience that I had in Iraq. That, okay, it happened. Let's start with that. And for whatever reason, I don't have to understand it. And so I told his parents, and that gave him a lot of peace. Mm-hmm. And I said, that was what I was supposed to do. And if it makes him feel better, I don't need to understand more than that. And that's the same with this experience. I like to know more about what happened and how it happened and what it means, that I had in Iraq. But when it comes down to it, it's changed my life profoundly. I no longer fear death. And I now race Ironman triathlons. And during the run, which is a marathon, I carry a flag for a local Gold Star family, someone who's lost their son or daughter in military service. And I bring them to the race. And I show that we can grieve together. We can celebrate this person's life together, that they're not gone, that they are still here. They're still part of this. This energy is not destroyed, even though the physical body may be gone. And I bring it together and invite them and bring them back into the community. Right? And so it connects, the veterans who have survivor's guilt a lot of times with a family who is grieving, missing their son or daughter and wants to connect with a veteran, and the community who a lot of times wants to help but isn't sure how. And through the sport that I really love. And I realized that this experience, if nothing else, has allowed me to create something that makes people feel really good and heal. And so maybe that's it.
Yeah, it's so beautiful. And the way that you tell your story is so authentic and heartfelt and genuine and real and just really transformative. And so I just want to say thank you. Thank you for your service, because I don't, in my world, like there's not a lot of people. I don't think I know anybody who's served in
thank you, Amy.
The military. I've never had the opportunity to thank someone and to hear face to face someone's story in this way. I have worked with people who have had family members who were killed, but it's different to hear directly from someone who experienced that, and to imagine the trauma that you experienced and what you have to live with in your mind every single day, and to have overcome that is such an inspiration, truly.
Thank you. And I want it to be an inspiration. And now my role with Ironman Triathlon, as an ambassador of the Ironman Foundation, the nonprofit part of it, is to include as many other veterans to make this part of their journey, and as many other Gold Star families. So it's not just about me that I've been given this second chance here. I've been given this gift of knowing that everything is going to be okay, even if I forget it sometimes in daily life. That everybody I come across, I want them to experience that if they're open to it.
Well, and I think when you're dealing with survivor's guilt, on one level, obviously you feel guilty that you're here and they're not, but it's almost dishonoring to those who aren't here to not live your life, because they completely. And that was this realization, and that I'm so glad you said that, because for a while, someone brought up just that. You think these guys would want you to be sitting around crying in your beer, getting fat, being miserable? Just, you think they want you to be doing that? Or you think you could honor them by doing the things you said you were going to do and being the person that you can be? And I said, that sounds great, but how do I do that? And so once I found out, it's like, well,
you just have to feel those feelings, which is simple in concept, but not
and
easy in practice.
It feels almost impossible sometimes. It's not, because we both sit with people all day encouraging them to feel their feelings.
Yeah, and it's so interesting being just talk about blurred boundaries. I'm a clinical therapist, and I'm a person on the spiritual journey, and I'm a veteran. But as a clinician working with other veterans, I'm supposed to be the provider. So my foot is in so many different circles here. But I'm okay with that, because I've become okay with uncertainty, and I've been okay with gradually trusting more and more of my intuition. And because trying to think through everything and trying to use just my cognitive rational brain isn't the answer. It's a good tool, but it's not the end all.
So if people want to follow you or find out more about you, where can they do that?
Well, I have a website and a blog and podcast, and it's transitionsfrommwar and .com, and it's the same at transitions_from_war on Instagram. And they can look me up by my name, Mike Ergo, ERGO. And the Ironman's put out a couple really cool videos on YouTube about the Gold Star Initiative, is what I call it. And it is such a fun thing. So it's that people can take a look at that and get a better picture of what I'm trying to do to bring these families and veterans and the community together. I mean,
doing one of those 3 parts of a triathlon to me is inspiring. So doing all 3 is pretty amazing, especially given everything you've been through.
It's a lot. I mean, the Ironman's 2.4 mile swim, 112 mile bike ride, and then the run is 26.2 miles. So full marathon. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And the first time I did it was the spring of last year. And it was that same kind of knowing that wasn't in my head, but it was really in my heart. I didn't know how I was going to do it, but I knew it was my next step. And so I just said, I'm going to do this. And they looked at me like, are you sure? I'm like, well, I know once I'm connected to my purpose that nothing will stop me. And that's that heart connection that I've been able to share with other people. And it's so fun to see them grab onto that too. The funnest thing before we go that I got to do so recently was there was a young man named Travis Desiato, and he's from Massachusetts, and he was killed in action in Fallujah, and he was part of my unit. I connected with his sister a few years ago, and as coincidentally or not, the first time I carried a flag and ran, just
I like that you throw in the or not.
Or not, yeah, because I don't. Every time I say maybe that's a coincidence, and I really put that out there, I'll just get this hilarious sign from the universe that no, it's not a coincidence. Mm-hmm. We connected and we did this together. We did this latest half Ironman together. So I swam and did the bike ride, and she carried a flag with her brother. And so that was the first time I got to do that for someone I personally knew, with someone, with a Gold Star family member. And that was, to date, the most special thing that I've been able to do, and part of still my own healing. So it's really fun. The neat thing is that healing and service and helping other people can be fun. It can be really enjoyable.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much for your time today. Incredible story. I am just really moved.
I have a good feeling we'll be connecting a lot in the future, because I'm going to do some work with military and vets who have had near-death experiences. I
would love that. Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, Thank you for having me on.
Thank you.
Like what you heard today and want to hear more? Curious about what comes next and what it all means? You can subscribe on iTunes. Just go to podcasts and find Life, Death, and the Space Between and hit subscribe. And you can follow me on Twitter and Instagram at Dr. Amy Robbins. Ask me any questions you might have. Let me know what else you'd love to hear about, or just share your story. I can't wait to hear from you.